Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Martina. So, one thing that is really useful to know before you get started with more complex patterns is how to read knitting instructions. Knitting instructions usually come in one of two ways or in both. I'll talk about both of them. Written instructions and graphical instructions. For the written instructions, they basically use abbreviations to indicate whether you're supposed to do a knit stitch or a purl stitch. Knit stitches are abbreviated by K, and if the instructions want you to do one knit stitch, they'll say K1. If they want you to do two knit stitches, they'll say K2, and so forth. Purl stitches are abbreviated by P. So if the instructions ask you to do one purl stitch, they'll say P1. If they want you to do two purl stitches, they'll say P2, and so forth. The graphical patterns use squares, where one square stands for one stitch. Empty squares mean that the front of your work is supposed to look flat or have these characteristic V shapes, so basically a stock knit stitch. So that means if you're working on the front of your piece, you're doing knit stitches. If you're working on the back of your piece, you're doing purl stitches. A square with a dash through it pretty much means the opposite of that. So if you're working on the front of your piece, you're doing purl stitches. If you're working on the back of your piece, you're doing knit stitches. And that way you get these bumps in the front of your piece. So the graphical patterns are usually just shown for the length that you need to repeat to form your pattern. So what that means is that once you get to the end of the pattern, you kind of keep going from the beginning and you repeat it as long as you need. If the graphical pattern is still kind of new to you and you don't want to have to think about, oh, when do I need to start repeating it? Where am I at in my piece? How is that pattern going to look like if I knit it on the number of stitches that I've cast on? One thing that you can do is to just write it out on paper for yourself so you don't have to think about all of those things. And I'll show you how I do that.
Alright, so suppose I want to do this garter checkerboard stitch, and I need it on a 20 stitch times 24 rows piece. Now the instructions are actually for 10 stitches times 12 rows, and because I don't want to have to think about how to repeat that over the length of my pattern, I'm just translating it into my own graphical pattern. So to do that, I prepared a little sheet of paper for me here. I wrote out 1 through 20 stitches going from right to left, because I'm starting the first row actually knitting from right to left, then the second row from left to right. So I also wrote the row numbers, the even ones on the right side and the uneven ones on the left side, so that I can orient myself a little bit better. And now I'm just kind of repeating out the pattern as it's in the book that I used to find it, or that I found online, wherever you find your patterns. I'm repeating it out for myself here on paper. So in the first row, nothing really happens. It's all knit stitches in the front. So the first thing something happens is at stitch 6 in row 2. So I'm putting some dashes here. There are actually 5 stitches in a row that get these dashes, and we have that in rows 2, 4, and 6. And now I'm going to repeat that for stitches 16 through 20. So I'm putting the dashes in here as well. Now that is going to switch, which creates this checkerboard effect. So starting in row 8, for stitches 1 through 5, I'm going to have the purl stitches here, so I'm putting the dashes in there for that. And then repeating that for stitches 11 through 15. Again, rows 8, 10, and 12. And now I'm going to repeat that same thing again, putting in 4 stitches 6 through 10 in rows 14 14, 16, 18, and the same thing for stitches 16 through 20. And then one last time for rows 20, 22, and 24. Alright, so now I have this pattern repeated for the dimensions that I want my piece to be. In a different video, I'm going to show you how to use this method for a pattern that doesn't actually fit your dimensions. So how to use it to adapt patterns for your specific needs. But yeah, you can pretty much use this method with any pattern that you want to use.